All right, so I'm going to show you guys how to emboss or engrave text into a block. So what I've gone ahead and done, and we'll just have you do, if at this point you probably know how to do all of this, is just extrude a 2-inch by 2-inch block, 1/2 inch thick. Once you have that, then we can go ahead and add text to this block. Let's say this is just something I want to engrave for knickknack and brand as my own. I'm 3D printing it. I want the 3D printer to engrave it or emboss it. So what I'm going to do is just on this plane here, the front face in my block, it happens to be, I'm going to go ahead and choose to do a sketch. And when I have that open, I'm going to go ahead and click up here to this text. All right, so now that I have text selected, I'm just going to select this midpoint. See how that midpoint constraint came up? And I'm going to go from that midpoint, and I'm going to go from this midpoint. I'm going to go and drag it down. I'm going to go ahead and go down this corner. And this little warning came up. We're going to see what it leads to. But I'm going to go ahead and just type in the Hawk Shop, which is what we call our industrial arts lab here at the school. And you can change the font. Nice thing is you do get a little preview window here of what it'll look like, because it doesn't exactly preview there. And then just hit check once you have the text that you want ready. Now, mine, because there's so much text there, unless you got away with just doing 1 or 2 letters, it's probably going to come up red like this. And that's because there's too much letters in the amount of space we defined when we drew our rectangle. And I did this intentionally. I wanted to go ahead and introduce something we haven't spent a lot of time talking about, which is constraints. So every time you do a sketch, you have this option here to show constraints or to not show constraints. When you have that selected, what pops up is these relationships. All right, and these relationships correspond with the symbols that are up here. As always, I recommend taking some time, holding your mouse over them. A lot of times you get a description, reading those descriptions, and just getting familiar with what each one of those mean. Now, the red means it's overdefined, meaning I said you have to, if you remember correctly, we clicked from this midpoint to this corner. And then it said you wanted me to put this much font in that little space. It's not possible. So what we need to do is delete some of these constraints. Anytime you have a sketch and you have show constraint selected, you can just pick a constraint, like this horizontal constraint, and I can hit delete and it's gone. Now, before I do, I want to ask you, what do you think is going to happen to that text when I delete that constraint? Okay, so it fell back to this other constraint we gave it, which was the bottom of the text box has to match up with the bottom corner of the block, and it put it at an angle. Once the horizontal constraint was gone, it wanted to make it still follow the rules we gave it to follow. All right, so we are black, we are fully defined. We could go ahead and emboss this or engrave this, even though it would compromise part of our P here and part of maybe a tiny bit of the T. But I don't think this is really what we want. So let's go ahead and get a little crazy here and delete that constraint as well. Right now we're back to a blue sketch, and we can do the whole click and drag thing and whatever else. Now, again, we can always emboss or engrave a blue text. And that wouldn't be a huge deal. But what I'm going to do instead is define it. And this is called a midpoint relationship. That symbol there, come up here, you can see if you hold your mouse over it, it defines it as a midpoint. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to make this spot right on top of that spot. And we're going to call that concentric. And once it loads here, what it should do is that corner says, hey, I have to be on top of this midpoint. This corner is saying the same thing about this midpoint. And so now we can no longer move it back and forth or up and down. We have it fully defined. It all fits on the block. I'm happy with where this is at. So what I'm going to do is just call this sketch text. And then I'm going to go ahead and let's engrave this one. So what I'm going to do is do an extrude. Make sure remove selected. If I wanted to do an emboss, I could add. And then the depth, I don't want to be 1 inch because that would go through the entire thing. So let's just make it 1/8 of an inch depth, 0.125. And what you should see once you hit check is an engraving of the hawk shop going 1/8 of an inch deep into that 1/2 inch block. Here's another feature that's just fun to play with when these types of projects. You can come over here. I'm going to move me over here, and you can turn section on. We're done with the text. If you're here watching it just for how to do text, you can move on to something else now. But if you've never played with section view, I recommend sticking around for that. What's up?
Greg, the bus driver guy, he poked his head through the shop door down there, asking if he still want the garage door open.
Oh, no.
No. I figured.
Okay.
I wanted to check with you.
Thanks. All right, sorry. So what we're going to do now is you select this and then select this arrow. What you're doing is you're cutting that block in half and looking inside of it. So you can see, the whole bottom 1/4 of an inch, 3/8 of an inch. Once we get to that final 1/8 of an inch, we can see that hawk shop start to show up. And then we'll come all the way through. So I don't know, just neat little feature to get you looking inside of that part. Anyways, that's how you use text. Real quick and dirty demo.